NFL Happy Hour here on HQ. Chris Hassel joined by Pete Prisco and Bryant McFadden. And Pete, this is your day to, it's kind of bittersweet because it's the very last power rankings of the 2021 season for you. Tell us how you came about ranking these teams. Did it have anything to do with projecting to the future, or is it all what happened in the past?
Well, there's a little bit of projecting to the future because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers right now don't have their quarterback. So if you rank them, you can't just rank them on what they did last year because Tom Brady's not there anymore. So, yeah, but mostly it's a look back at last season kind of with some of that sprinkled in. It's not a complete look ahead to next season. I will do another batch of power rankings after free agency, then do another one after the draft, and then do another one right before the training camp starts. So I do have a couple more before the start of the regular season. This is kind of a combo of the two, but mostly a look back at last season.
Nobody likes rankings more than Pete Prisco. Pete, you were the original ranker among the NFL writers, were you not?
I was. Way back in the day, we created the power rankings that everybody has really copied. We should have put a copyright on it. We would have owned it.
And right now he ranks Bryant McFadden as his #1 analyst to work with here on HQ. That's why BMAC is on the show with us. Let's start at #1, and it is the LA Rams. They're 10-1 to repeat. And Pete, as you know, all in last season, and a lot of question marks going into next season, like will Aaron Donald retire? Will Sean McVay go to the broadcast booth? Who can they afford? Who are they going to have to move on from?
Yeah, and there are a lot of questions in terms of the injuries, too, with Odell Beckham. Robert Woods is coming off a major injury. Beckham won't be available. If you sign him on a one-year deal, he's a free agent. Does he come back for that? Maybe try and play in the postseason if you get there. The offensive line, the interior has some issues as well. Brian Allen's an unrestricted free agent. Austin Corbett, the right guard's an unrestricted free agent. What do they do with Andrew Whitworth? Does he come back? I mean, yeah, there's a lot of questions. But one thing you have to do about this, think about this team, is that, Les Snead, the general manager, has done a really good job. And I'll give you a perfect example. Whitworth missed time this year, and Joseph Noteboom went in and played very well. Played almost to the level of Whitworth. You draft those younger guys, and then you ready them when it's time to go in, and I think that's what they do. They don't have a lot of premium picks, but they've done well with the later picks, and that's how you keep this thing going.
Yeah, I think looking at how dynamic Les Snead was in creating, big-time players to add to their roster was a thing of beauty. But like you said, Pete, the resources, the draft resources, the lack thereof, has been well documented. So if they're going to improve this team, they're going to have to do so mostly through free agency. And I do believe they will have to add some depth at the wide receiver position because we don't know exactly where Robert Woods will be when the start of the season kicks off. If you're able to bring back Odell Beckham Jr., clearly he won't be healthy in the start of the season. So maybe, adding a body here or there. Hopefully he can get something out of Tutu Atwell, a guy they drafted in the second round last year who was hurt the majority of 2021. But this is a team. They have stars up and down their roster. And having Matthew Stafford back, clearly that's a big-time plus. Aaron Donald, hearing that he potentially will come back. You have to like their roster as it is now without any adjustments, any additions, but they have to get very, very creative via free agency because they won't have the resources to do so through the draft.
So they're 10-1 to repeat. The Bengals 14-1 to not only get back to the Super Bowl, but to get over the top this time. And Pete, that all begins, you would think, with protecting Joe Burrow this offseason.
Yeah, they have to get better on the offensive line. I mean, it's quite obvious to everybody, even the layperson who watches the game, knows that they have to protect Joe Burrow. I mean, he was sacked 70 times, counting the playoffs and the regular season. He was sacked 19 times in the postseason. That can't happen. And the more and more you go through these playoffs, you look around and you say, hey, the Chiefs saw it last year. They went and fixed their offensive line this year. They were dominating the Super Bowl. And I think the Bengals have to do the same thing. Every priority has to be on fixing the offensive line. Jonah Williams is fine at left tackle. Everywhere else you have major problems. Remember, they played the playoffs without their starting right tackle, who they signed on a one-year deal, Riley Reiff, and he's now an unrestricted free agent. The right guard is a disaster. Although Jackson Carman was a second-round pick, they had high hopes for him. Didn't work out. Sometimes guys take a leap, but it has to be all about the offensive line. They have to get better there. Remember, they drafted 3 offensive linemen last year Carmen being the only one who stepped in and played. They have to figure out a way. Hey, maybe sign Teron Armstead. Go out and spend some money on the offensive line. You could maybe move him to right tackle or move Jonah Williams to right tackle, and you'll solidify yourself at 2 spots. You have to protect the franchise quarterback.
Yeah, I agree with you. The offensive woes on the line were well documented going into the Super Bowl, and that's why I felt like they would give up sacks, and they did. So if you want the best out of Joe Burrow, protect him. And I love the idea of going to spend top dollar to go get a guy like Armstead, because now you solidify the edges when it comes to protecting Joe Burrow. And outside of the offensive line woes, what about, adding depth and adding more competition in the secondary at the cornerback position? Eli Apple was a guy who filled in because of an injury, but he had his woes. He had some inconsistent plays, and he made some big-time plays as well. But they need to get better at the edges of their defense. I love everything about Cincinnati based on how their defense is structured, and the same can be said for their offense. But if they want to continue to be relevant and competitive, they can't get complacent. Add some talent offensive line-wise, and add some talent in the secondary, and they can find their way. They can find their way right back in the playoff conversation.
7-1 to repeat as AFC champions. Last season they were 75-1 to win the AFC, which they did. All right, number 3 in Pete Prisco's postseason power rankings. Pete, your pick before the season to win it all, the Buffalo Bills, who, you could argue the coin flip goes the other way, and maybe they do win it all.
Well, you could argue if they knew how to handle the final 13 seconds of that game, they would have won it all. And I think they would have. I think they would have been a team that would have given Cincinnati a lot of fits in this championship game, maybe more so. But they blew it in 13 seconds. You have every opportunity to go to the Super Bowl, get to the championship game, have it at home, and they didn't. So now what do? Well, one of the things you have to do, and I think Brandon Beane came out, and this is going to be a constant theme throughout this show. They have to fix their offensive line. They thought that Josh Allen was way too sped up at times last year, and he was. And you look across the board, the left tackle is a good player, but they have some issues at a lot of other spots, and they have to get better up front. And I think they're going to focus on that this offseason. Let's not forget, they get Tre'Davious White back. They played the playoffs without him. He's an elite corner. That will help. But I think the priority has to be protecting Josh Allen. He's great outside the pocket. He's a big physical quarterback, but eventually you want him staying in there and getting the ball out quicker. So I think it's going to be, really fortifying the offensive line for the Bills.
They have the second best odds to win it next season behind the team that beat them in that game of the decade, game of the century, game of the millennium type game against the Kansas City Chiefs, who are 7-1 to win the Super Bowl. BMAC, it seems like every year the Chiefs are favorites to win it, and Mahomes is the favorite to win MVP.
No question, because he's that type of talent. And I think looking at where he is in his career, you want to continue to add resources, big-time playmakers around Pat Mahomes. So me personally, I look at a wide receiver, adding wide receiver depth. You got Tyreek Hill. You got Travis Kelce. Mecole Hardman has been sprinkled in here or there, but they don't have that go-to number 2 guy. So adding a wide receiver to that offense, a guy that can definitely create separation, another big-time speed-like player, that would be huge. But then let's transition to the defensive side, guys. Defensively, they were dealing with injuries, right, especially on the front. But when they had an hands-on-deck mentality, they gave him a lot of big plays in the secondary. What's going to happen with Tyrann Mathieu? I, for one, believe they should go ahead and bring him back. He is the quarterback of their defense, especially in the back end. He does a lot in coverage. He does a lot in tackling and blitzing. He's a guy that understands the game of football. And we saw how much they missed him when he was out with injury, but also added some competitive play at the cornerback spots as well. They gave up a lot of pass. Remember, it feels like Jamar Chase is still scoring another touchdown on Kansas City because he had that type of ball game in the regular season meeting in Cincinnati. So adding wide receiver depth, clearly bringing back Tyrann Mathieu, and making some moves at the cornerback spots needs to be a necessity for Kansas City.
And Pete, you round out the top 5 with the Green Bay Packers, and everybody this week is trying to read into, the reported separation of Aaron Rodgers and his fiancée, not going to get married reportedly. What does that mean for Rodgers' future?
I think it means what I thought all along, Chris, and you know how I felt about this. I never thought he was leaving. I really don't. I think there's a legacy to be had in Green Bay. I mean, that's his team. That's who you identify him with. What is the advantage of going to the Denver Broncos? You go into a division with Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert and the Raiders, who are a playoff team, whereas if you stay in your own division, you got the Vikings, the Bears, and the Lions. I mean, why would you leave to go to Denver? I don't understand it. Now they're talking about coming up with a contract that's team-friendly, yet still makes him one of the highest-paid quarterbacks in the NFL, if not the highest-paid quarterback in the NFL, with dummy years on the end of it. You bring Devontae Adams back, and you get rid of like a couple guys. Okay, Zadarius Smith, he didn't play barely at all this season. He still went deep into the postseason. You know, Preston Smith, same situation. You get rid of him. You save cap money that way, and you move on from there. So I think there's a way to make it work with Aaron Rodgers, and I think deep down, he's a smart guy. He knows what legacy means, and I think in the end, he's going to go back to Green Bay.
All right, so let's transition to the 1 seed in the AFC going into the postseason. BMAC, the Tennessee Titans come in at number 6 in Pete's postseason power rankings.
Well, I'm surprised to see Tennessee at number 6 behind Green Bay. But that's another topic of discussion because I really want to jump on Pete for having Tennessee behind Green Bay. But you know what? I'm going to allow Pete to have his glory time. Hoorah to Pete. Hoorah to Pete. Now let's get back to the Tennessee Titans. A nice year, great year considering the circumstances they were dealing with, right? But the way they lost that ball game, unacceptable. Me personally, looking at the Tennessee Titans, if you're dealing with Ryan Tannehill, you're stuck with Ryan Tannehill, he is your guy you have to lean on and move forward with. But trying to get the best out of Ryan Tannehill has to be an important thing for them this offseason. Wide receiver, you have A.J. Brown. What will happen with Julio, we don't know. But even when they had those two guys healthy, they had no quality number 3 guy to rely on. Finding a way to add more playmakers around Ryan Tannehill. Finding a way to add more playmakers that can catch the football to add to what Derrick Henry brings to the table. That has to be the move. And I would love to see Tennessee get better at the cornerback position as well. You know, we saw Christian Fulton, we saw Jack Rabbit. Both guys gave up some plays, but they need to add depth in the secondary to pair up with Byard and the rest of the crew. But it starts and stops with Ryan Tannehill. You want to try to make life as easy for Ryan Tannehill as possible. They need to find a way to get better at the wide receiver position outside of A.J. Brown.
So teams trying to win without a marquee quarterback, like Ryan Tannehill, got the Titans to the number 1 seed, but hasn't been able to get them to the Super Bowl. The 49ers have not had a marquee quarterback. They probably are going to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo. Pete, you have the Niners at 7. Does Trey Lance make them better?
That's to be determined. I mean, there were times when he played where he looked like he was, on the verge of taking over and maybe even being that guy, and then he would regress. And that's the inconsistency of a young quarterback. There's a lot to like there. I mean, you can put a lot of different things in for Trey Lance because he can move, he can run. But we don't know. We have no idea what he's going to do when he's a starter week in and week out. It's a big difference when you're the guy and everybody has a book of tape on you and they can prepare for you, rather than being a guy who goes in certain spots and starts a game here and there. So it'll be interesting. They clearly like him. They moved up to get him. But this is a big issue for the 49ers, is his growth next year. They're built to win. I mean, they have a ton of talent. They have stars. When you look at their team, you got Kittle, Bosa, Samuel. You have stars. So it's all about the quarterback position. And ideally, they trade Jimmy Garoppolo, get some draft capital, and they go play with Trey Lance. But he's an unknown. And right now, if you ask me, are they better off with him playing next year or Jimmy Garoppolo? I'd probably say they're better off with Jimmy Garoppolo, but that's not the direction it sounds like they're going.
Okay, let's move on to the Cowboys at number 8. And Pete, they seem like a team that's a little bit like what the Rams did. I mean, the Cowboys seem like a team that if they could just go all in, get that one championship, that would satisfy a lot of need. Now, they've come close to going all in, but they haven't come close in the postseason.
Yeah, I think this is a team that is loaded with stars. They just got to get them to play to that level. And remember, they had a ton of injuries and issues this year that really hampered this team. COVID set them back at the wide receiver position. I mean, before the season, they lost Michael Gallup. Before the season, we're sitting here saying, oh, wow, they're going to be this wide open, pass happy, throw it around to who's going to stop them offense. And at times they look like it, but they had too many issues. And health was one of them. COVID was another. They have to stay on the field. Defensively, they're still not good enough yet. And, look, they have some good players. They give up a lot of big plays in the passing game. They have to be better on that side of the ball. But here's the other thing. The pressure's on Mike McCarthy. Every time he takes the field, the pressure will be on him. He knows Dan Quinn is there. He knows Kellen Moore's there. If they get off to a slow start, he's out the door. One of those guys replaces him. So that puts another level of pressure on the Dallas Cowboys, a team that probably where the coach has more pressure than anybody in the National Football League.
Yeah, and to piggyback off what Pete mentioned regarding the Cowboys, it's all about the interior for me on both sides of the football. They got to get bigger. They got to get tougher, especially defensively. That was a unit, when you look at the guys they had in the secondary, when you look at the linebackers, they did a real good job. But where they lost a lot of opportunities to make big-time plays was in the interior of their defense. They gave up a lot of yards from opposing running attacks they face. They got to get bigger. They got to get physical. And the same can be said offensive line-wise as well. Tyron Smith is getting older. He's been dealing with injuries. It seems like every year they got to add some depth to the offensive line spots. But in the trenches, I think, is where the Cowboys need to improve the most. And if they would like to have an opportunity to make a deep playoff run, it starts there.
All right, let's move on to number 9 as we get close to finishing up the top 10 from Pete Prisco's postseason power rankings. And Pete, it's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I'm surprised that they're that high, considering Tom Brady has retired. Are you thinking there's a chance he comes back at some point?
Well, I think there's a chance, but I also think they're going to go explore the quarterback market. But also, this is kind of looking back at last year. I mean, they earned the right to be there. If Blaine Gabbert is the starting quarterback of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're down into the teens, the 20s. But if they have Deshaun Watson, for example, they'd be right where they are right now. So it just depends on what they do, which is why these are not exactly a look ahead to next year. I did drop them down a little bit because, we don't know who's going to be the quarterback. But there's still a talented roster there. There's still a good coaching staff. Todd Bowles is still there. Byron Leftwich is still there. And Bruce Arians is still there. So I think they're going to be competitive, and it's a bad division. I mean, you look at the division. Look at the uncertainty all around the division. If they can find some semblance of good quarterback play, then I think they have a real chance. And, they're probably going to lose some of these free agents. I think Chris Godwin's probably out the door, although they'd like to keep him. And what's Gronk do? Does he retire? Where's Jensen go? Those are big questions. And Carlton Davis, their best corner. So those are big questions to face. But I think they'll keep the majority of the guys around, and if they can fix the quarterback, they're going to be right back in the mix.
Yeah, good point on the divisions. Pete doesn't have another team in that division in the top 15 as we continue to move forward here. And finish up the top 10. Mac, I'll give you first word on the Patriots. Pete has them 10th after a good rookie season for Mac Jones.
Yeah, pretty good rookie season for Mac Jones, but he needs to take a step further for them to continue to be competitive and make a deep postseason run. So I like to start defensively with the Patriots. They got to find a way to get another edge rusher to pair up with Matt Judon that can beat one-on-one opportunities. When you look at Judon, he was a terror. Big-time acquisition who paid. It was a payoff for the New England Patriots, but they got to find a way to get other guys that can win one-on-one matchups. I start there. And what about wide receiver? They paid a lot of money to guys last year. You got Bourne, you got Nelson Aguilar, but either guy never showed that they could be the number one guy. So I think it's important for them to be able to get the most out of Mac Jones, find a way to go get him a number one wide receiver. And I think right now, if you look at Bourne, you look at Nelson Aguilar, I think at best case scenario, either guy would be considered a number 2. Find a way to go get your rookie quarterback a number 1, similar to what we saw from the likes of Buffalo when they added Stephon Diggs to Josh Allen. We saw how that helped Josh Allen's career. I think the same thing could happen if they go out and find a way to get a number 1 wide receiver for their young quarterback.
Yeah, I agree with you, B-Mac. They need to get some speed. They also, they spent money on Jonnu Smith last year. He did nothing for him. And you mentioned Judon.
Yeah.
I mean, they paid a boatload of money for him, and then he came in there and he started off really well. In the last half of the season, he did nothing. And a lot of that has to do because, like you said, they need another guy. Hey, Chandler Jones is out there. Bring him back. Maybe you can go get him to come back and help rush the passer in New England because they need help in that situation as well.
All right, Pete, B-Mac, hang tight. We're going to get to every single team, all 32 in Pete's power rankings. Want to recap the top 10, and it lays out pretty much as expected at the top. Rams 1, Bengals 2. They played in the Super Bowl. And then Bills, Chiefs, Packers 3, 4, 5. Pete thinks Aaron Rodgers is going to come back, and the Buccaneers, if they can get a decent quarterback, maybe go out and get a Deshaun Watson, and outside of the legal troubles, if that's all right and he can play, he thinks the Buccaneers can be a contender again next season. Up next, Pete's got some non-playoff teams ranked ahead of playoff teams. Maybe the Chargers ahead of the Raiders, for instance. 11 through 20 coming up. Back here on CBS Sports HQ, looking at Pete Prisco's post-Super Bowl power rankings. Rams won it all. They're number 1, followed by the Bengals, Bills, Chiefs, and Packers. Pete thinks Aaron Rodgers will come back to Green Bay. And then the Titans, Niners, Cowboys, Bucks, and Patriots round out the top 10. Let's look ahead 11 through 20 with Pete Prisco and Bryant McFadden. I am Chris Hassel. And at number 11, Pete, the Arizona Cardinals. And this is a team that even if they jump off to a great start next season, all season we're going to be asking the question, yes, but can they sustain it?
Well, that's a legitimate question, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that Kyler Murray has not finished the season healthy. I mean, it happened again this year. He just hasn't been the same player down the stretch, and he's been on the field, but you can tell he's not healthy, and when he's not healthy, he's not the same player. They struggle offensively. A big part of what he does is getting outside the pocket. Now, he lost Hopkins. Obviously, that was a big hit to the offense, but they just didn't play the same way down the stretch, and that has to change. It starts with him. You're starting to hear reports that there's some friction between him and the organization, whether that's a contract move, who knows. But the reality is it's on him, it's on Cliff Kingsbury, and it's on Steve Keim. If they don't get to the postseason this year and at least win a playoff game, I think they're all out, and that could be major or at least the coach and the GM will be out, and then you're going to start talking about a new GM coming in and maybe making a deal to trade Kyler Murray. So I think this is a major year coming up for both Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray.
Yeah, and to make Kyler Murray feel good, why don't you provide better play offensive line-wise, right? Making some additions, being able to get more sound play to keep your quarterback upright and to keep him healthy. And then when you transition to the defensive side, Chandler Jones might not be there. If you lose Chandler Jones, man, you're losing a lot of production. So it starts and stops me personally in the trenches, and you could add some depth at the wide receiver position because, Pete, you're dead on. When they lost DeAndre Hopkins, the offense flatlined. So that tells me they're too reliant on one guy when it comes to catching passes. They got to find a way to add more talent to the pass-catching positions to be able to get the most out of your quarterback.
All right, Cardinals number 11 in Pete Prisco's post-Super Bowl power rankings. At number 12, BMAC, it's a team that overachieved, in most people's opinion, in the first year under Jalen Hurts. But how do they take that next step next season?
Well, Chris, number one, I'm surprised to see Pete have the Eagles number 12. I think the Eagle fans, they're okay with that. But I have a little issue, but I'm not going to jump on that just right now. But for Jalen Hurts, man, did some pretty good things, did some questionable things, but I think he still has a bright future there in Philadelphia. They need to add a wide receiver, and I'm not just talking about a young wide receiver. Why don't you add a guy who's been in the National Football League for some time that understands what it means to be a pro and a reliable pass catcher to add to the young, talented studs they already have there in Philadelphia. And also inside linebacker. They got to find a way to get stout play from the inside linebacker positions for Philadelphia. When you look at some of the teams they play against in the division, they love to run the football. Dallas Cowboys, Ezekiel Elliott, Washington, the Commanders. I got to get used to saying that, by the way. Antonio Gibson, and who knows what the Giants will be able to do. But if they got a healthy Saquon Barkley, they would like to run the football. So they got to play better football when it comes to the inside linebacker position. And either you can improve that area via the draft or via free agency.
All right, let's move on to
They have a ton of young
Go ahead,
talent.
Pete.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
They have a ton of young talent that's ready to take the next step. They also have cap room, which they can go get a veteran if they need be at certain spots. And they have 3 first-round draft picks. What's not to like? I think Jalen Hurts took a step forward this year. I think this is going to be a team to keep an eye on going forward.
1, maybe 2 Super Bowls for Jalen Hurts in the next 10 years, would you say?
No, I didn't say that. Didn't say that yet.
Not yet. We'll see. All right,
I
Pete.
was waiting. I was waiting to hear
No,
his answer.
B-Mac, I tried to speak it into existence, but he says no. The highest-ranked non-playoff team, Pete, the L.A. Chargers at number 13.
Well, this is all about my respect for Justin Herbert. I think he's a star of stars playing the quarterback position. He's only going to get better. I think Brendan Staley learned a lot in his first year. I really do. I think there were times where he was outcoached. There were times where he went for it in certain situations he shouldn't have. He got caught up in the emotion of all the analytics. He could talk till he's blue in the face that they were the right decisions. They weren't in a lot of situations. But he'll learn from that, and he'll be better. He's too smart a guy. He'll be a better coach. And I think that team will be better because Justin Herbert will develop a much better rapport in that offense. So I'm bullish on the Chargers. I think they should have been in the playoffs as is. They choked against the Raiders. They were the better team. So moving forward, I think they're going to push for that division again next year.
And at 14, B-Mac, the Indianapolis Colts. And where do they go if it's not with Carson Wentz?
That's the issue. That's the biggest question in regards to the Colts. Quarterback. Carson Wentz was supposed to come in and take them to the next step, similar to what Matthew Stafford did for the Rams. Didn't happen. They actually were better off with Phillip Rivers a year before. So what will happen at the quarterback position? Because this is a team that's ready to win and compete right now. You look at the division, it's wide open. You're basically battling against one team, which is the Tennessee Titans. Outside of that, it's a rebuild for Houston. It's a rebuild for Jacksonville. The window is open within their division, but they have to find a way to figure out who the quarterback is and go get a guy that can take them to the next step. Maybe adding a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo. That would be a huge, huge plus and might be an upgrade because he tends to play better football, and he's been a proven winner when given the opportunity to win ball games. Not to mention, all he needs to do is hand the football off to JT, Jonathan Taylor, and allow his defense to do what they've been doing over the last few years. But that's the biggest concern, the biggest question for Indianapolis. Who will be the quarterback in 22? I think they should move on with Carson Wentz and just see what it takes to go get a guy like Jimmy G.
All right, Pete, I think there's an alert on your phone there I just heard. Do you have the Raiders at number 15? And the Raiders behind a couple of non-playoff teams. It sounds like they're going to be giving Derek Carr an extension, too.
Well, I think Derek Carr and Josh McDaniels will have a good relationship. I really do. And look, Josh McDaniels in his first stint as a head coach was a disaster. I didn't think he did a good job. He tried to be something he wasn't. He's admitted that he's matured. He's learned that. And I think he's going to be much better the second time around as a coach. Now, whether they get the roster right, that's a whole nother issue. But I do think that, Derek Carr will be better playing for Josh McDaniels. And I think that offense will be better. They still, obviously, with Henry Ruggs gone, now you got to go back and find a speed element to add to the offense. The offensive line will develop. Defensively, we know they can rush the passer. They have to be better in the secondary. So they have a new defensive coordinator as well. So, the whole staff coming in, so they're going to have to learn a new defense as well for the third straight year. So there's a lot of things at play, but I think Derek Carr and his relationship with Josh McDaniels will be very good.
Okay, moving on to number 16, B-Mac. It's the Baltimore Ravens who barely make the cut in the top half of Pete's NFL in these post-Super Bowl power rankings.
And I'm okay with that. We saw some bad play given the issues, injuries, and COVID issues as well. But for me, Baltimore, you got a quarterback. Find a way to get the best out of Lamar Jackson. They need to go get a number one guy, a guy that could be available free agency. Chris Godwin could be available along with some other guys. They need to go give their quarterback a guy that can come through in the clutch outside of Mark Andrews. He's been the most reliable pass catcher because he had to be the most reliable pass catcher, and he has that type of skill set. But just imagine how good this offense could be with J.K. Dobbins, Mark Andrews, and a proven guy at the number one wide receiver spot that has been known to do damage against opposing defenses. That's the one area they need to improve on. It seems to be the case for them, have been the case for them over the last 2-3 years.
And the lowest ranked playoff team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And B-Mac, I know you won 2 Super Bowls with the Steelers, but this really is the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. The question is, what is that era going to look like at quarterback?
That's the thing. Like, what do you do at the quarterback position? I would love to hear Pete's thoughts about the quarterback. But I feel like the quarterback of the future is currently not on the roster, so they have to find a way to get that guy on the roster. This is a team, when you look at Najee Harris, offensive line-wise, they should improve. You know, wide receiver-wise, they got some players that can play football. And defensively, you know they're always going to be a stout group, especially with T.J. Watt in uniform. But it's about the quarterback play. They're in a division that got 2 top-tier-like players at the quarterback spot in Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson. If you want to contend with those 2 teams, you better find a way to improve the quarterback, and I don't think that answer is currently on the roster.
In the article on CBSSports.com, Pete says Taysom Hill should start all 17 games at quarterback. So there you go.
You're lying. You're lying. Stop lying, Chris, please.
Hey, let's move on to those New Orleans Saints and Taysom Hill and Pete. Dennis Allen, the new head coach, but in need of a quarterback.
Yeah, until they solve that position, they're not going to be a team that I would think that could contend for anything. I mean, you have to solve the position. And where do they go? Does Jameis Winston come back? He played well when he was there, but this, that was with Sean Payton. Now what do they do going forward? I don't think they can play with Taysom Hill. They need to keep him as the gimmick. He's a much better weapon as the gimmick than he is as a starting quarterback. So they have to find a quarterback, whether it's Jameis Winston coming back, maybe making a big splash. Maybe they go nose around. Now, they have cap issues. In fact, they're in cap hell. So they have to figure out a way to get a quarterback. But if it's Taysom Hill, good luck with that.
All right, Pete, how about the Broncos? And they have a new head coach, Nathaniel Hackett. And Broncos fans, fingers crossed, they think they have a chance of getting Aaron Rodgers as well.
If they get Aaron Rodgers, this team soars up to, toward the top. It's a big change for them. But if they don't, what do they do at quarterback? Do you bring back, your guys that you have? Is Drew Lock one of your guys? He's on the roster. Is he the starting quarterback? Do you go get a veteran? If you can't get Aaron Rodgers, do you try and get Russell Wilson? Do you inquire about Deshaun Watson if he's available? So I think there's a lot of uncertainty here. This is a talented team. They have young playmakers outside. Defensively, they're good, particularly in the secondary, and they can rush the passer. So I think when you look at them on paper, that's an ideal situation for a veteran quarterback. But if you don't get Rodgers, where do you go? What do you give up? I think that's the major question with the Broncos.
Yeah, things look a lot different on paper, don't they? At number 20, it's the Cleveland Browns, a team that some of our analysts said on paper had the most talent in the league last season. B-Mac?
On paper, it looked that way. Clearly, when you put the film on, you didn't see the same expectations come to fruition. So me personally, you know about the concerns with Baker Mayfield. I think they're stuck with Baker Mayfield. But why don't you add a number 1 wide receiver to pair with what they already have going on the offense? The way they run the football, you're going to have opportunities to throw the football. But they got to get some guys that can be reliable. I love Jarvis Landry. He's a guy that does damage, especially in between the 20s in the slot. But you got to find a way to create separation at the perimeter as well, and I think that has to be the biggest concern with them, along with interior defensive play as well. You see there on your graphic, you could lose Malik Jackson, you could lose Malik McDowell, so now you lack depth in the interior of their defense. But most importantly for me, it starts with the wide receiver position. You got some serviceable guys that will be free agents, Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, a few other guys as well. But find a way to go get a proven number 1 to pair up with Jarvis Landry to help your quarterback be as consistent as possible.
All right, Bryant McFadden talking Pete Prisco power rankings here. Let's recap 11 through 20. And several playoff teams like the Cardinals, who had the most wins of this group, 11-6 overall, but losing in the first round of the eventual Super Bowl champions. And then some teams looking for quarterbacks like the Steelers and Saints at 17-18. And yes, the Broncos need to figure out that quarterback position as well. Browns fans would say, yeah, maybe we do too with Baker Mayfield, maybe getting 1 more year. Up next, we got a bunch of teams with new head coaches like the Vikings, Dolphins, and Bears. We continue with Pete Prisco's end of season power rankings next.
Welcome back into CBS Sports HQ, taking a look at Pete Prisco's final power rankings for the season. We just finished 11 through 20 there with Chris Hassel. Cardinals coming in at 11, but where will they rank at the beginning of next season based on what happens this offseason and Kyler Murray? Eagles promising, Pete says. They made it to the postseason. They have 3 draft picks in the first round. Steelers, Saints, Broncos, even the Browns for that matter. A lot of questions surrounding those teams. So let's welcome back in Pete Prisco and Bryant McFadden here. Let's pick it up with the Vikings coming in at number 21 BMAC, but they do have a new head coach in Kevin O'Connell now, and it looks like they're sticking with Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that. I think when you look at offensively, the cupboard is not bare there in Minnesota. You got a proven running back, 2 outstanding wide receivers. You get a healthy Irv Smith Jr. back into the fold. And I really love the staff that Kevin O'Connell is putting together on both sides of the football. But when you talk about trying to improve this team to be able to get into the postseason, I think they need to get better defensively, especially at the edge rushing position. Not knowing exactly what will happen with Danielle Hunter, contract-wise or injury-wise, you need to improve the depth there. Also in the secondary, getting some stout play at the cornerback position, not knowing what will happen with Patrick Peterson. He is a free agent. If you lose him, Cameron Dantzler was a guy that had some ups and downs, but still very, very young. Boyd was another guy that stepped in, but they need to improve in that area of their team to be able to get into that postseason conversation.
Dolphins coming in at number 22. Pete, I went back to see where you had them at the beginning of this past season. They were at 13, and you said it's all about Tua making strides. We did not see that happen, and now it will be up to Mike McDaniel to try and do that, which he says he can, but not sure.
Yeah, and Mike McDaniel is a really good, bright offensive mind. So if he can get if anybody can get Tua to play to a higher level, I think Mike McDaniel can do that. I think the system will help him. He's going to put in that 49ers system where you run the ball. They have to find an elite running back or at least a guy who can handle the majority of the carries. And if they do that, and they can take the pressure off Tua, because he's going to be good in that offense. He can move. He can throw on the move. I think it'll make it easier on him. And that team, and this is a big year for Tua, if he takes the strides, that team has talent. And I think if he can take the strides, they could be a playoff team. If he doesn't, they'll be looking for a new quarterback next year.
All right, let's go to the Falcons coming in at number 23. Pete, this is a team that has not been to the postseason since 2017. I mean, any hope they can be in a different position come next season?
Well, I think there is, and they showed last season at times that they would compete, and they had a ton of injuries. They had some real major situations. You had the Calvin Ridley situation. What's going to happen with him? He walked away from the game for mental health reasons. Does he come back? Kyle Pitts will be better next year in that offense, and I think Matt Ryan in the second year in the system will be better. The key for them, as it is for a lot of teams, and we keep repeating this over and over and over again, when do you learn to protect your quarterback? They've invested a ton of draft capital in their offensive line, and it hasn't worked. And they just can't protect him. And Matt Ryan, he takes a ton of shots. So they have to get better at 2 areas. And it's the same story for the Falcons. Protect the quarterback and knock the other guy's quarterback down. Until you get good in those 2 areas, you're not going to be that good. I think they will be better. How much better is to be determined.
What about the Seahawks, though, coming in at number 24 for you, Pete Prisco there? I mean, we don't know what's going to happen to Russ. Not sure what's going to happen to Pete Carroll. Where do the Seahawks go from here? How can they climb out of this?
The Seahawks, to me, look like a team in transition. Russell Wilson, will he be there? Won't he be there? Does he want out? There's some reports that he wants to come back. But they've already made major changes on the staff, which is a concern. That usually tells me that a coach is getting a little bit desperate. And Pete Carroll, he has a whole new defensive staff in there. Rightfully so. They were terrible on defense last year. They have to get back to their roots, playing good defense, running the ball, and having Russell Wilson take shots over the top. I think they can get better on offense. I'm still concerned about the playmakers on defense.
Coming in right behind them in Pete Prisco's final power rankings of the season, BMAC at number 25. They started off as the Washington Commanders. They're ending the season, or they started off as the Washington football team, ending as the Commanders there. They started at 13, ending at 25, BMAC. What do you think?
Well, this is a team, Amanda, I believe they're ready to win right now. They just have to find out what they're going to do at the quarterback position. I think they should go out and make a move because you look at the pieces they already have in place. I'm okay with the offensive line. I love Antonio Gibson. I love the depth at the running back position. If you can get a healthy Curtis Samuel along with scary Terry McLaurin, that's a nice duo of pass catchers. Don't forget about Logan Thomas. So it's all about the quarterback position. Will they stick with Taylor? Will they go out and make a move? And also adding another third wide receiver, a guy that can really do damage when given the opportunities will be definitely beneficial for their team. But it's all about the quarterback position. Everything else will fall into play once they figure out what they're going to do there.
Another team that needs a quarterback coming in at number 26 for Pete Prisco, the Panthers there. 3 straight 5-win seasons. 2 of those now belong to Matt Rule. And B-Mac, same thing. They need a quarterback.
They need a quarterback, but it sounds like they're kind of tied to the hip with Sam Darnold. And if that's the case, then you got to find a way to make things work as best as possible. I think it would definitely help Sam Darnold's case if Christian McCaffrey is healthy. But also, offensive line play, being able to protect Sam Darnold and open running lanes for Christian McCaffrey is a big time need for them. Defensively, I love everything about their defense. Getting a healthy J.C. Horn back definitely will improve their defense. But all the moves they need to make, guys, is solely on one side of the football, the offensive side. Quarterback, question mark. Offensive line, wise, question mark as well. If you can improve those 2 elements of your offense, this team will be better than what they were in 2021.
Pete, coming in at number 27 for you, you have the Bears. A lot of new pieces already heading into next season. A new head coach, a new GM. Justin Fields heading into his 2nd season. Can we expect strides from this team?
Yeah, I think you will because you'll see strides from Justin Fields. I don't think we saw the best of him. We saw a lot of plays where he got outside the pocket, he created with his legs, but he wasn't good standing in there, going through his progressions, making all his reads. But that's understandable. Rookie quarterback thrown in there, then he didn't play for a while, he's back in, then he's out. So I think next year he's the guy, and he will play much better. And I think the Bears will be better. But again, you look at their team. The offensive line, questionable. Receiver, questionable. Defensively, they're starting to have some age over there and some free agents. So it's a tough transition, but as long as you have him and he can show the growth that you'd love to see from year 1 to year 2, they'll make strides. They won't be a playoff team, but they'll push for better wins, more wins than last year.
All right, guys, hang on just a second. We're going to take a look at what we just looked at, 21 through 27 there. 3 teams, though, with new head coaches heading into the 2022 season, including the Vikings, the Dolphins, and the Bears, both BMAC and Peak saying, look, all of these teams can make strides. It's just a matter if they're going to do it or not. Coming up, we'll take a look at the bottom of Pete Prisco's power rankings at the end of the season. Does anyone have a chance to make a big leap, or is it just more bad news? That's next. Welcome back. Taking a look at Pete Prisco's final power rankings of the season. These are the bottom 5 teams there. You get the Lions, the Giants, the Jets, the Jags, and the Texans. Now, I will say 3 of these teams, it's very familiar situations. The Lions, the Jets, and the Texans began the season in the bottom 5, and that is where they remain. Let's welcome back in Pete Prisco, Brian McFadden here. Pete, let's start with the Lions coming in at number 28 for you. You do note that they did play hard at the end of the season, but what to do about Jared Goff now?
Yeah, that's a legitimate question. There were times where he played good football. He actually played some pretty good football down the stretch. The question is he their guy? And I think that's still out there kind of hovering above this franchise. I don't think they know if he's their guy. So they'll probably play this year with him. And then you have to ask the question, do you draft a replacement if you don't think he's the long-term answer? So I think that'll be interesting draft weekend to see if they do draft a quarterback. But they have some young guys that are, we look at rosters and who's going to take a stride forward. I think the Lions can be a better team next year because they started playing much better down the stretch.
Giants have a new head coach, BMAC, and Brian Dable here. Look, he did a lot of good things with Josh Allen. It looks like they're sticking with Daniel Jones. What do you feel about the Giants coming in at number 29 and what they look like next season?
I think a deserving position being 29th on Pete's power rankings, and I think understanding and knowing what they need to do, it starts and stops at the offensive line positions. Both tackles have been inconsistent. Thomas, Soldier, they both have struggled. So if you want to see quality sound play from your young quarterback, find a way to get better offensive line-wise. And they've been trying to do so. They've just been missing the ball and giving those opportunities. And what about Saquon Barkley? Are you willing to ride it out with him, or are you looking for the next best thing at the running back position? And because he hasn't really lived up to expectations because of injuries and because of bad offensive line play. But maybe if they can improve offensive line wise, we can see a better Saquon Barkley as well. That division is wide open, but if you want to be able to compete in that division and get the most out of your quarterback, find a way to get better offensive line play.
BMAC, the Jets are a team that started the season in the bottom 5 for Pete there. They end the season coming in at number 30. What is your faith in Zach Wilson like right now?
To be determined. Let's keep it real. We saw some pretty nice things. We saw some bad things, some very, very bad ball games. But I think that was the expectations, especially knowing the organization he was walking into to try to save. But me personally, Zach Wilson is your guy this season because you invested a lot into getting him. Let's see if he can improve. Adding maybe another wide receiver or something to the fold would definitely be huge. But what about the defensive side? Remember, Robert Salah got that job because of the defensive job he did in San Francisco. They missed the bar. They didn't play the type of football we thought they would play. You get Carl Lawson back, that should be a huge addition because he missed the entire season, but maybe adding some more depth at the pass rushing position and getting better at the cornerback spot as well.
Pete, coming in at number 31, you find the Jacksonville Jaguars. Look, at the beginning of this season, you had a new head coach. You had the number 1 overall pick. You end the season just not feeling very good about things. But from what you're hearing, it looks like things are a lot better in that building already with Doug Peterson.
And by the way, they ended the year with, right, they came into the season with a new head coach and the number 1 pick, and they're going out with a new head coach and the number 1 overall pick.
That's really
it's
true.
It's the same old again for the Jaguars. But you know what? Doug Peterson's in there. He's got skins on the wall. He won a Super Bowl. I think he brings a different feel to that building. It was miserable with Urban Meyer running that place. And everybody, I'm talking about from all the equipment staff and all the support staff, they were miserable. They're not that way anymore. I think Trevor Lawrence will love Doug Peterson as his offensive coordinator. They have cap room. They have the number 1 overall pick. They have a bunch of draft picks. You should be able to get this team to 7-8 wins this year with Trevor Lawrence playing in his second season.
A lot of the same. Hopefully it doesn't end the same next season, Pete. All right, coming in at the very bottom, number 32, Pete Prisco has the Texans. Pete, I'll start with you. BMAC, you can follow on this one as well. Pete, what do we make of the Texans at this point?
You know, it's interesting because they were actually playing better football down the stretch and playing harder. And you thought, okay, well, maybe they'll bring back David Culley. Well, they get rid of David Culley, and then they go through a search, and they end up hiring Lovie Smith, who was their defensive coordinator. And from what you heard, they wanted to hire Josh McCown and only got talked out of it and ended up on Lovie Smith. It's a disaster in a lot of ways. What they did find last year was Davis Mills, more than just a stopgap quarterback. He can be their long-term answer. So with that in mind, they have to figure out what they're going to do with Deshaun Watson. Do they trade him? Can they trade him? Will somebody trade for him? I think that's the biggest question hanging over the Texans this year. He's not going to play for them, but will somebody trade for him if all his legal issues are not remedied? And if they don't, what does that mean for Deshaun Watson? But I think Davis Mills will be the quarterback of the Texans next year.
Yeah, I agree with you regarding Davis. I think he will be the quarterback. They don't have any other option. I don't know if they're willing to invest in a young quarterback considering all the other concerns they have on their team, especially on the offensive side. And I'm right there with you as well, Pete. Deshaun Watson, what will they do? And what will they get in return if they're able to make a move with Deshaun Watson? Remember, this is a guy that missed the entire season, made almost $40 million this past season. And I think his cap number drops a little bit to around $20 million or so, but that's still a pricey price to pay for a guy that's not playing, and you don't have any insight on wanting him to play. So if they can move Deshaun, what they will get in return, because this is a team clearly they're in the beginning stages of a rebuild. We don't expect to see a lot for them, but it's all about the future plans in this organization, and it starts with what will happen with Deshaun Watson.
Pete Prisco, Bryant McFadden, we appreciate it. Let's take a look again at what we have seen here. These are Pete Prisco's post-Super Bowl power rankings. This is what he had, 1 through 10. So look, these are the teams. You did great. We're going to see what you look like next season, but so far, A+ for all of you. By the way, if you didn't know our own Bryant McFadden, he has a podcast, All Things Covered, with BMAC, his cousin, Patrick Peterson there. They break down the Super Bowl, what we saw, and also the reaction to the Vikings hiring Kevin O'Connell as their head coach officially now. Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.